We're going to continue on from the last video with how to export your Illustrator file and create that JPEG. The first thing we need to do is figure out which artboard it is that we want to export. And of course, we want to export the one that we've just been spending all this time on that used to be 1600 by 1200. One of the easiest ways to find out which artboard number this is just simply click on any part of it and look down in the bottom of your document right there, and that will tell you which artboard it is. If that should give you any trouble, you can also go to Window, and then go to Artboards and open up the Artboard panel. And then in here, when you click on whichever artboard, it'll highlight the artboard. Now, you're not looking at these names here, you're looking at the number. So again, the number that we want is 2. We're going to go up to the main menu and go File, Export, Export As, and we are going to take care of all of these items inside of that little dialog box that comes up. So we're going File, Export, Export As. We want to make sure that we're putting this in the proper file, and this is going to be the one that goes into Turn into Steve. So let's get back to the main menu, Turn into Steve, and then we want to make sure that we're saving this correctly. So we're just going to get rid of everything like that, and then we're going to change the format to JPEG. There's a very important step here. Check Use Artboards right there. Now here in range, we need to put the artboard that we want, which we figured out earlier was artboard number 2. Then we are going to click Export. Another little dialog box is going to open up. And since our main viewing for this is going to be on the web, we are going to choose RGB. And since we are going low resolution with this, we want to put the quality at maximum. So make sure you slide this all the way over to the right. For the compression method, we are going to use baseline standard, and the resolution is going to be very low, just 72 pixels per inch. And then we want to use, under the anti-aliasing, we want type optimize hinted. And that just makes sure that your work, if it has text on it, it will try to make it as crisp as possible. And then we do want to check this embed profile, and then we are going to click OK. So now you should have a file that is a JPEG inside of the folder, and it should be ready to turn in, but this is one of the most critical steps, is we want to test that image in Photoshop before we turn it in. Before we open the file, it's important to understand a couple things. One, we do not want to save this image again in Photoshop. We are just looking at it to make sure it is okay. Actually, saving a JPEG in Photoshop, each time you do that, it applies compression. So that's a bad thing. Locate the file, open it in Photoshop. Then the first thing we're going to do is run through what's known as the F key test. So at this point, you should probably have the AI file that you turned in earlier to me in the turn in folder, and then this new file that we just made. And we want to right click on that and open with Photoshop, or open Photoshop first and then go File and Open and navigate to the folder. And then the F key test, you just simply press the F on your keyboard and it'll cycle through a couple different visibility modes. And what you're looking for in this mode is, does this look like anything less than your completed assignment? Let me show you a bad example here so you can see one possibility that could happen. This will normally be something that will happen if you don't have a bleed on the document, and that'll be, you just have like this little sliver of white that shows up here, and you may not notice it at first, but usually when you cycle through here, then it sticks out when you see it against a dark black background. So in the rare case that you're working on something that did not have a bleed on it, and this happened to you, then what you'd have to do is go back to your Illustrator file and make your entire thing, your entire project, a little bit bigger without stretching it so that it covers the whole entire artboard. If at this stage you're seeing this plus other things like another big chunk of white and maybe another project, that's most likely because you forgot to check use artboards in the previous steps. If you pass the F key test, then you can go ahead and check the image size and make sure you get what you were expecting. Now, what should you be expecting? Well, per the way this works, your document's either going to be exactly 1600 pixels wide or exactly 1200 pixels tall. If it's both, that's highly unusual. And usually it's a red flag to me that you're not doing it right, that you're stretching it or, trying to push it into maximizing that size. And again, you're only supposed to hit one of those two numbers. Now, how do you know if it should be which case? 1600 wide or 1200 tall? Remember what you did back in Illustrator. If you touched the top and the bottom of the artboard, then you're going to expect it to be exactly 1200 pixels tall. If you touch the sides, then you're going to expect it to be 1600 pixels wide. Now, very important, it can be 1 pixel off. There's something about the way Illustrator rounds that sometimes it adds a pixel. So based on this example, we are expecting this to be 1200 pixels tall. So we go to image, then we go to image size, and this little dialog box opens up here, and we get the pixel dimensions up here, but it doesn't hurt to just go ahead and change this to pixels so we can see it with the width and the height. And if we look at the height and it's 1200, which is what we were expecting, then we are good. As long as the width is something less than 1600, which should be the case if you followed the previous instructions. And the other thing we should expect to see in here is that the resolution was what we set it to, which was 72. Now, for completeness sake, let's go ahead and look at one that is clearly much wider than it is tall. In other words, one that we touched the sides of that 1600 by 1200 artboard, not the top and the bottom. And then we had to bring the top and the bottom in. Now, before I show you this, let me just point out something very important here. I make this offer to help you out with these files, especially your early ones. And basically, if you have a problem, what you want to do is send me your file at the point where you're at 14 minutes and 32 seconds. And when I say send it, that would be for an online class. You would email it to me. In an in-person class, you would just call me over to your desk. The reason I'm pointing this out right now is this is pretty much what you would be sending me or calling me over to your desk. Because this is what I'd want to see if you're having problems, that you have your normal size artboard over here, the project size, and that you had your artboard over here that was actually be, well, it could be at this step where you had this artboard over here that was 1600 by 1200, and this is right after you resize the height only. If you send me your file at this point, I could tell you exactly what was going wrong. Like maybe you left the bleeds on. Nope, everything looks fine. Are you sure you're remembering to check use artboards and so on? Okay, so if this is what our project looked like, we resized it, we got rid of the cover, and then we exported it. Just went through all those steps. And now if I go to the folder where that is in, and I open it in Photoshop, so ask yourself what you expect to see when you look in image size. And of course, first do the F key test just to make sure that there are no slivers of white showing up here, which there weren't. And then we go to image size. And since this one hit the sides, we are expecting to see something that is 1600 pixels wide within 1 pixel, resolution at 7200. And then if we do hit the width right on the nose, we expect the height to be 1200 or less. So if any of this does not work out for you, just try it again much slower. As you're doing it, save off a copy of what you come out with at 1432 so that when you go through the tests again and it doesn't come out, then you can ask for help. So some things to keep in mind. When you do this process of making this JPEG, the purpose of this is for easy sharing. Like, let's say you wanted a relative in another state to look at what you were doing. It's going to be much easier for you to send them this JPEG, which pretty much everybody can open, rather than you sending him the AI file, right? It's also a much easier way to put your work online. Also, there's just so much stuff these days that we use screens for that it'd be pretty hard to imagine you ever working and not needing to convert something that you did in Illustrator into some form of an image. Maybe not JPEG, but there were other options, as you probably noticed when you were doing these steps. But one of the key takeaways is that you are ruining this image. As far as if you were to print it, you would never ever print from this document. And that brings us to a quiz question. I should always print from my original highest quality file, never from a converted JPEG or a reduced file. In the steps, you notice that we selected RGB for our export. If you were sending this converted file to a print-based contest, just note that it probably would be CMYK because they're going to print it and put it in a magazine or a book. They may want say a TIFF file or a Photoshop document instead of a JPEG, but very easy to just look at the options you have and make slight changes along the way. So along the way, you got to see why a bleed is important in a document, not only for printing, but also it helps with doing these files so that we never end up with that little sliver of white. We've talked about this reason why it's really important to learn these steps. Another reason that we do it this way rather than just say, for example, opening the AI file in Photoshop, which would automatically convert it to a bitmap image. We don't have any control of the file size that way, and we don't want to keep resizing and re-saving files in Photoshop because it will reapply JPEG compression each time and make it look worse each time, which is the answer to this quiz question, is we do not want to have multiple instances of compression being applied. Another reason that we do this is so that we can show our work digitally, like in a portfolio, and we have this nice consistency that happens when our image is taller than it is wide. It still kind of looks good because see how this one and this one are the same, and then when they're wider than they are tall, they occupy the same amount of space. What you don't want to have happen is all of a sudden an image comes up that's way bigger than everything else. Right? So that's why you want this kind of consistency. But also your work is you're doing this so that you can show your work. You don't want it to look any different than the finished product when you finished it for the project. So that takes us to this quiz question, is my JPEG file should look 100% like my finished project. It should not be stretched or squished, and it should not have any additional white space. So again, the answer to this question is project. And then this question, the reason for learning to make our projects have a consistent height or width is to help make a portfolio website in the future. Again, the answer is portfolio. And then finally, if I cannot get my image size to come out within 1 pixel of what is shown in these video instructions, I should complete the steps up to 1432 in the previous video, which was this name, and show the file to my instructor. And again, the answer is show.